Hey guys, tonight we're standing in the mouth of a cave that smells like charcoal and something that might be fermented berries or might be the remains of a meal nobody finished. Staring at a wall covered in paintings, so beautiful and so precise that modern art historians have spent entire careers trying to figure out how someone with no formal training, no electric lighting, and no Instagram following managed to create them using spit, animal fat, and the stubborn end of a burnt stick. We're going deep, tens of thousands of years deep, into the parts of human history that science has poked, prodded, carbon dated, laser scanned, and argued about in peer-reviewed journals for decades, only to arrive at the same conclusion every time. We genuinely do not know. These are the prehistoric mysteries that remain unsolved, and tonight you're going to fall asleep inside every single one of them. Before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me which prehistoric mystery you'd personally like to solve: the cave paintings, the megaliths, or the fact that someone 10,000 years ago figured out brain surgery before anyone figured out bread. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that gentle white noise, and get comfortable. Imagine the fan is wind passing across the mouth of a limestone cave 40,000 years ago, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and absolutely no Wi-Fi signal whatsoever. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it actually smelled like inside a cave where people lived for generations, and whether you'd last 5 minutes before asking to leave? Have you ever wondered how a group of people with no wheels, no metal tools, and no written language moved an 80-ton stone across 20 miles of open countryside and then stood it upright, apparently just because they felt like it? Have you ever wondered why someone in prehistoric Turkey decided to build a massive temple complex with elaborately carved pillars and then, for reasons nobody can explain, buried the entire thing on purpose? Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have a hole drilled into your skull with a sharpened piece of flint and then survive, heal, and apparently go back for a second round? Have you ever wondered why the Nazca people spent generations carving enormous pictures into a desert floor that can only be properly seen from the sky in an era when nobody could fly? Have you ever wondered whether prehistoric people looked up at the same stars you can see from your bedroom window and thought the exact same thing you're thinking right now, which is probably, "I should really be asleep by now"? Section break. Portal. Congratulations. You've just woken up in roughly 35,000 BCE, somewhere in what will eventually become southern France, but is currently just a lot of cold limestone, dense forest, and the overwhelming smell of wood smoke mixed with animal hide and the particular musk of people who have never encountered the concept of soap. The ground beneath you is hard, a thin layer of dried reeds over stone, and something warm and slightly damp is pressed against your leg, which turns out to be a half-tame wolf pup who has decided you're its new favorite sleeping arrangement. The sky outside the cave is enormous and full of more stars than you've ever seen in your life, because light pollution won't be invented for another 37,000 years. Welcome to prehistory. The beds are terrible, the food is unpredictable, and the mysteries are absolutely everywhere. Let's set the scene. You're standing at the entrance of a limestone overhang that serves as home for roughly 30 people, and the first thing that hits you isn't the cold, though it is cold, the kind of damp, bone-level cold that your central heating was specifically invented to prevent, but the smell. It's a layered thing, this smell. There's the base note of wood smoke, which is constant and everywhere, because fire is the single most important technology anyone here possesses, and it runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, tended by whoever drew the short straw on night watch. On top of that, there's animal hide curing, drying, being scraped, being worn, which smells like a leather goods store that has never heard of ventilation. And then there's the people themselves, who smell exactly like you'd expect people to smell if bathing was seasonal at best, and deodorant was roughly 35 millennia away from being invented. Spoiler, it's not great. But here's the thing about this world that nobody tells you. It's beautiful. Not beautiful in the way a resort brochure is beautiful, obviously more beautiful in the way a landscape is beautiful when there are no roads, no fences, no pylons, no billboards, and no indication that anyone has ever tried to improve upon what's already here. The river that runs through the valley below is clear enough to see the stones on the bottom. The forest is the kind of old-growth, cathedral-ceiling woodland that most of the modern world cut down centuries ago. The air, once you get past the immediate vicinity of the camp, is cleaner than anything you've ever breathed, because the Industrial Revolution is a distant hallucination. You're standing in a world that is, in the most literal sense, untouched. And the people who live here know it in a way you never will, because they don't have a word for nature to them. This isn't nature. It's just everything. The camp itself is organized in a way that looks haphazard but isn't. The main fire sits in the center, ringed by flat stones that have been worn smooth by generations of sitting. Sleeping areas radiate outward families in the deeper recesses of the overhang where the rock holds warmth. Lone hunters closer to the entrance where the draft keeps them alert. Tools, hides, food stores, everything has a place, and everyone knows where everything is. Because in a community this size, someone moving your favorite scraping stone is the prehistoric equivalent of someone borrowing your phone charger and not giving it back. And yet, despite everything about this place that seems simple, and it does seem simple, in the way that anything looks simple when you strip away 35,000 years of accumulated complication, the people here are doing things that modern science cannot fully explain. They're painting images on cave walls that demonstrate an understanding of perspective, movement, and anatomy that wouldn't reappear in Western art for tens of thousands of years. They're tracking the movements of stars and seasons with a precision that implies a system of knowledge so sophisticated it had to be passed down orally across hundreds of generations without ever being written down. They're burying their dead with flowers, with tools, with ochre pigment rubbed carefully into skin rituals that suggest a concept of the afterlife so complex and so emotionally rich that calling these people primitive starts to feel not just wrong, but embarrassing. Welcome to the world before history. It's messier, colder, and more mysterious than you ever imagined. Let's talk about the walls. You're crouching now, and you are definitely crouching, because the ceiling in this part of the cave is roughly the height of a particularly ambitious coffee table holding a small stone lamp filled with animal fat and fitted with a wick made of twisted moss. And the flickering light is throwing your shadow against the rock in a way that makes you look like a very confused giant. The passage narrows, the air gets colder. The smell shifts from wood smoke to something older wet mineral, the clean, sharp tang of limestone that has been here since before anything alive existed. And then you round a corner, hold up the lamp, and your brain goes very, very quiet. The paintings are there. They've been there for thousands of years already, and they'll be there for thousands more, and right now, in this moment, you're seeing them the same way they were meant to be seen, by the light of a single guttering flame deep underground in absolute silence. There are horses. There are bison. There are aurochs, massive, muscular cattle that looked like they were designed by someone who thought regular cows weren't intimidating enough. The animals are running, leaping, turning. They're not static images. They move. The artist, and you find yourself thinking of this person as an artist, not a caveman, not a primitive, because what's on this wall is art. By any definition you've ever encountered, understood something about motion that most people don't figure out without a series of expensive drawing classes and a student loan. The paint itself is made from ground minerals ochre for the reds and yellows, manganese dioxide for the blacks, sometimes charcoal, sometimes iron oxide mixed with animal fat or blood or water or saliva. The colors have survived for 40,000 years, which is more than you can say for the paint in your bathroom, which started peeling after about 18 months. Whoever made these images understood their materials with the intimacy of someone who had spent a lifetime experimenting, failing, adjusting, and refining. This wasn't a hobby. This was a discipline. But here's where the mystery starts, and once it starts, it doesn't stop. Nobody knows why the paintings are here. That sounds like a simple statement, but sit with it for a moment, because the depth of what we don't know is genuinely staggering. These paintings are located deep inside caves, not near the entrance where people lived, but far back, in places that are difficult and sometimes dangerous to reach. Some of the chambers at Lascaux, in what will one day be France, required the artist to crawl through passages so narrow that a modern adult can barely fit through them. At Chauvet, some of the most spectacular images are in chambers that show no evidence of habitation whatsoever. No fire pits, no tool marks, no food remains. People came here specifically to paint, in the dark, underground, and then left. Why? The theories are numerous, and none of them are fully satisfying. Hunting, magic, painting animals to ensure a successful hunt. Shamanistic practice entering the deep cave as a spiritual journey. The paintings serving as a record of visions experienced in altered states of consciousness, communication with the spirit world. Initiation rites, education, storytelling, simple, artistic expression. Every theory explains some of the evidence, but not all of it. The hunting magic theory stumbles on the fact that many of the painted animals aren't the ones these people actually ate. At Lascaux, the walls are covered with horses and aurochs, but the bone fragments in the living areas show they mostly ate reindeer. At Chauvet, there are lions, rhinoceroses, and bears, animals you'd avoid, not hunt. The shamanistic theory has traction among some researchers, but it's built largely on analogy with modern indigenous practices and applying modern cultural frameworks to people who lived 30,000 years ago is, to put it mildly, a methodological minefield. And the simple art theory they painted because they liked painting is weirdly undervalued, possibly because academics are uncomfortable with the idea that the answer to a 30,000-year-old mystery might just be because it was cool. Spoiler, nobody has solved this one yet. And there's another detail that makes the whole thing even stranger. Some of the paintings incorporate the natural contours of the rock itself. A bulge in the limestone becomes the shoulder of a bison. A crack becomes a spear. A concave surface becomes the belly of a pregnant horse. The artists weren't just painting on the walls, they were collaborating with them, seeing shapes in the stone the way you see shapes in clouds, and then making those shapes permanent. It's the oldest known example of something that might, if you're being generous, be called mixed media. And it happened in a place with no art schools, no galleries, no critics, and no funding applications. In the end, The paintings do what all great art does. They make you feel something you can't quite explain, and that feeling has outlasted every civilization that came after. And honestly, that's good enough. Let's talk about Old Ember. Every community has one, the person who seems to know things that nobody taught them, the person everyone defers to in a crisis, the person whose approval you need before you do anything significant, up to and including dying. In your group, that person is an elderly woman you've mentally nicknamed Old Ember, partly because she's always sitting closest to the fire, and partly because her eyes have the particular intensity of someone who has been watching the world for a very long time and has formed some opinions. Old Ember is, for want of a better word, the shaman. She doesn't call herself that, obviously, because the word shaman won't be coined for a very long time. And because she doesn't call herself anything, she just is what she is, which is the person who understands the things that everyone else finds terrifying. She knows which plants heal and which ones kill, and the margin between the two is narrower than you'd like. She knows the movements of the stars, the meanings of dreams, and the proper way to prepare a body for burial. She knows when the herds will move, where the fish will run, and whether the winter will be harsh, and she's right often enough that questioning her feels like a bad idea, even before you factor in the social consequences. Her authority isn't official. There's no election, no title, no badge of office. It's earned, the way authority was earned for most of human history through demonstrated competence, institutional memory, and the quiet understanding that crossing her would be spectacularly unwise. She wears ornaments made from bone and teeth, fox canines, deer incisors, shells that came from a coast nobody in the group has ever visited, traded hand to hand across hundreds of miles over years. The ornaments aren't decorative. They're a curriculum vitae. Each one represents a skill, a journey, a piece of knowledge that she carries and that the community depends on. Losing Old Ember wouldn't just be sad. It would be a library burning down. And here's what science can't quite figure out. How much did people like Old Ember actually know? The conventional view of prehistoric knowledge, that it was rudimentary, fragmented, mostly guesswork, has been slowly, methodically demolished by every new archaeological discovery of the last 50 years. These people tracked lunar cycles. They predicted seasonal changes with enough precision to plan migration, planting, and storage months in advance. They understood the medicinal properties of plants that modern pharmacology has only recently confirmed. They performed surgical procedures that we'll get to later. And trust me, you're going to want to be lying down for that chapter. The knowledge was vast. It was sophisticated. And it was stored entirely in human memory, passed from one Old Ember to the next across millennia, which is, frankly, the most impressive filing system ever devised, and makes your cloud storage look like a suggestion box. Of course, the thing about unwritten knowledge is that it can vanish. One bad winter, one epidemic, one generation that doesn't listen carefully enough, and centuries of accumulated understanding disappear like smoke. Which means the knowledge we've managed to reconstruct from archaeological evidence is almost certainly a fraction of what actually existed. We're looking at the surviving footnotes of a library we'll never read. And yet, here sits Old Ember, tending the fire, watching the stars, quietly holding together a world that runs on knowledge she will never write down and that nobody will fully understand again. Let's be clear about something. You live in a world with rules, lots of them. Traffic lights, tax codes, terms of service agreements you've never read. Your life is governed by a dense network of regulations so vast that no single person understands all of them, and you navigate it mostly on autopilot and good faith. The prehistoric world has rules too, fewer of them, arguably, but enforced with a directness that makes a parking ticket look like a polite suggestion. The first rule is sharing. Not sharing in the kindergarten sense, not sharing because it's nice, or because someone told you to, or because there's a poster on the wall that says, "Sharing is caring," with a picture of a smiling sun. Sharing because if you don't, you die. This is a community of 30 people in a landscape that is actively trying to kill them through cold, through starvation, through large animals with poor impulse control, and the only reason any of them are alive is because they pool resources, labor, and knowledge. Hoarding food is not a character flaw here. It's a survival threat. The guy who eats more than his share doesn't get a talking to. He gets the prehistoric equivalent of being voted off the island, which is just being told to leave, except the island is everywhere and there's nowhere to go. The second rule is reciprocity. If someone gives you something, a tool, a piece of meat, a favor, you owe them. Not immediately, not formally, not with a contract or an invoice, but in the deep, structural way that defines every relationship in a group this small. You helped me carry the kill? I'll stand watch while your family sleeps. You shared your ochre? I'll help scrape your hides. I. The entire social economy runs on a system of informal debts that everyone tracks mentally with the precision of a forensic accountant, and defaulting on those debts is roughly equivalent to declaring social bankruptcy. Nobody writes it down because nobody needs to. Everyone remembers. The third rule is respect for the dead. And this one gets strange because the way prehistoric people treated their dead is one of the most persistent mysteries in archaeology. Graves from 30, 40, 50,000 years ago contain bodies arranged in careful positions, curled on their sides, arms folded, legs drawn up, surrounded by objects, tools, weapons, shells, beads, animal bones, flowers, ochre, red ochre, specifically rubbed onto the skin or scattered over the body in quantities that suggest genuine ceremony, not accident. What does it mean? The honest answer is, we don't know. The presence of grave goods implies a belief in some form of continued existence after death. You don't pack someone a lunch for a trip they're not taking. The ochre suggests ritual, symbolism, meaning. The careful positioning suggests tenderness, grief, love. But the specifics, what they believed, what they hoped, what they feared, are locked inside minds that left no written record. We can see the shape of the belief, but not its content. It's like finding an empty envelope addressed to someone you'll never meet. You know a message existed. You'll never know what it said. And that, right there, is the mystery that keeps archaeologists awake at night, which is ironic, given that you're supposed to be falling asleep. Let's talk about the people you're stuck with, because this isn't a solo adventure. This is a community messy, loud, occasionally fragrant, and populated by individuals who are every bit as complicated, annoying, and endearing as the people you know in your actual life. You've met Old Ember. Now meet the rest. There's Knuckle. You call him Knuckle because his hands are enormous, thick, scarred, the hands of someone who has spent a lifetime gripping tools, dragging carcasses, and punching the occasional predator in the face with varying degrees of success. Knuckle is the best hunter in the group, and he knows it, and everyone else knows it, and the dynamic this creates is exactly the dynamic you'd expect. A combination of genuine respect and low-level irritation. He communicates primarily in grunts and surprisingly graceful hand gestures that convey more meaning than you'd think possible. He has a scar across his left eyebrow from an encounter with a cave bear that he survived and the bear did not. And he touches the scar absent-mindedly when he's thinking, which is more often than you'd guess. There's Bright Teeth, who is young, maybe 16 in modern terms, and who earned the name by smiling constantly at everything in all situations, including situations where smiling is objectively inappropriate. Bright Teeth is the group's unofficial experimenter. They're always trying things, mixing new pigments, testing new tool-making techniques, tasting plants that Old Ember has explicitly said not to taste. Bright Teeth has been mildly poisoned at least 3 times that you know of, and shows no signs of stopping. They are, in the terminology of every era that follows, a menace. They are also, undeniably, the person most likely to accidentally invent something important, because innovation and recklessness have always been uncomfortably close cousins. There's Worm. Worm is the toolmaker. Quiet, nervous, flinches at sudden sounds, and produces flint work of such delicate precision that it borders on the miraculous. Worm can take a piece of raw flint and, through a process of carefully controlled percussion that takes years to master, produce a blade so thin you can see light through it. This is not an exaggeration. Archaeologists have found prehistoric blades that are thinner and sharper than modern surgical scalpels. Worm doesn't talk much, but when Worm makes a tool, everyone watches, because it's one of the few activities in camp that consistently produces something beautiful. Worm is the artist nobody calls an artist. And then there's Long Shadow, who got the name for the obvious reason: he's tall, unnervingly tall for this era, all limbs and angles, and when the afternoon sun catches him right, his shadow stretches halfway across the camp like a sundial with anxiety. Long Shadow is the tracker. He reads the ground the way you read a book prints: disturbances, broken stems, the angle of pressed grass, and he does it at a speed that suggests he's not reading at all, but simply knowing, the way you know the layout of your own bedroom in the dark. He's also, somewhat incongruously, the person who tells the best stories around the fire, because life is full of contradictions, and prehistoric communities are no exception. These are your people. You didn't choose them, they didn't choose you, and the whole arrangement works because it has to. Welcome to the world's oldest flat share. The lease is eternal, the landlord is the weather, and the complaints procedure hasn't been invented yet. Let's talk about breakfast. Or rather, let's talk about the concept of breakfast, which, in your current situation, is considerably more aspirational than you're used to. In your normal life, breakfast is a decision. Cereal or toast, coffee or tea, eggs or yogurt. The whole process takes maybe 10 minutes, involves no physical danger, and the worst possible outcome is that you burn the toast and have to start again. In 35,000 BCE, breakfast is a project. It might take hours. It might not happen. And the gap between those two outcomes depends on a combination of skill, luck, weather, and whether anything large and predatory got to your food cache during the night. The base diet here is meat, primarily reindeer, in this part of the world and this era, supplemented by horse, bison, ibex, and whatever else the hunters managed to bring down. The meat is cooked over open flame, which sounds rustic and charming until you factor in the complete absence of seasoning, the dubious freshness of anything stored in a limestone cave without refrigeration, and the texture, which is best described as challenging, if you're being polite, and like chewing a leather belt that's been left in the rain, if you're being honest. Spoiler, you learn to chew. But meat isn't everything. The gathering side of the hunter-gatherer equation is enormous and persistently undervalued. The people around you eat roots, tubers, wild onions, mushrooms, berries, nuts, seeds, leafy greens, and the occasional handful of insects, which are, objectively, an excellent source of protein and, subjectively, exactly as unpleasant as you're imagining. The variety is wider than you'd expect because these people have been studying the local flora for generations, and their knowledge of which plants are edible, which are medicinal, which are poisonous, and which are poisonous in small quantities, but medicinal in smaller quantities, is encyclopedic. Old Ember can identify several hundred plant species by sight, smell, and taste. Your most sophisticated interaction with plants is probably deciding whether the avocado at the supermarket is ripe yet. There's also fish, in season pulled from the river with woven traps that are surprisingly elegant pieces of engineering. And there's stored food, dried meat, rendered fat, nuts cached in stone crevices that serves as the insurance policy against the bad days, the empty hunts, the weeks when the weather turns and nobody leaves camp. The storage system is primitive but effective, and the social rules around it are absolute. You don't touch the stores unless the community agrees. Raiding the communal pantry is the prehistoric equivalent of emptying the office fridge and pretending you didn't, except the consequences are significantly worse than a passive-aggressive post-it note. The wolf pup, incidentally, is watching you eat with the particular intensity of an animal who has learned that proximity to humans means proximity to scraps. Its eyes track your hand from the food to your mouth and back again with the focus of a tennis spectator. You toss it a piece of gristle. It catches it mid-air and disappears under a pile of hides to consume it in private, because even proto-dogs understood that the safest way to eat is to eat alone. Some things never change. And in the end, the mystery of prehistoric food isn't really about what they ate. It's about how they knew what to eat. Because the process of figuring out which of the thousands of available plants are safe to consume by trial, by error, by watching animals, by incremental experimentation across generations, represents one of the greatest, most dangerous knowledge projects in human history. People died so that other people could have breakfast. And nobody wrote any of it down. It was all held in memory, all passed by voice, and it worked for longer than any cookbook in history. Let's talk about the stones. Not the small stones, the ones worm naps into blades and scrapers, with the patience of a saint and the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. The big ones, the enormous ones. The ones that weigh more than a commercial airliner and somehow ended up standing upright in circles and rows and alignments across Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Americas, placed there by people who had no wheels, no pulleys, no draft animals, and no obvious reason to torture themselves with the logistics of moving something that would make a modern crane operator nervous. You know about Stonehenge. Everyone knows about Stonehenge. But Stonehenge is actually the easy one, in the sense that we at least have a general theory about how the stones were transported, a combination of sledges, rollers, waterways, and the raw, blistering, back-breaking labor of hundreds of people working over decades. The real mystery of Stonehenge isn't how they got the stones there. It's why they went to such extraordinary trouble to get stones from a specific location. The blue stones, weighing up to 4 tons each, were transported from the Preseli Hills in Wales, roughly 150 miles away, which is the ancient equivalent of ordering a specific brand of countertop from a quarry on another continent because you saw it on a design blog and wouldn't settle for anything less. But Stonehenge isn't alone, not even close. The world is scattered with megalithic sites that raise the same basic question, how, and more importantly, why, and the answers are consistently, almost aggressively, insufficient. At Karnak, in Brittany, there are over 3,000 standing stones arranged in rows that stretch for miles. At Baalbek, in Lebanon, there's a retaining wall built from stones, weighing up to 800 tons, the largest hewn stones in the ancient world. At Sacsayhuaman, in Peru, walls are built from stones so precisely cut and fitted that you can't slide a piece of paper between them, and this without any metal tools. The engineering is real. The stones are there. The question is always the same. How did they do it? With the technology they had. And here's the uncomfortable truth that drives archaeologists and engineers equally mad: we can probably work out the how. With enough people, enough time, enough patience, and enough raw determination, you can move a very large stone a very long way using nothing but human muscle, rope, and leverage. It's not impossible. It's just extremely, preposterously, mind-numbingly difficult, which circles back to the deeper mystery. Why would anyone choose to do this? Why would a community that is already working dawn to dusk just to stay alive invest years, decades, possibly generations of labor in moving enormous rocks into a specific arrangement? The standard answers: astronomy, religion, ancestor worship, territorial markers are all probably partially correct, but none of them fully explain the scale of the effort. Building Stonehenge didn't just require labor. It required coordination, planning, resource allocation, food surpluses to feed the workers, social structures to organize the project, and a shared vision compelling enough to sustain multi-generational commitment. These weren't primitive people stacking rocks. These were civilization-scale engineering projects executed without any of the infrastructure we associate with civilization. And that paradox that the monuments imply a level of social organization that shouldn't have existed yet is the stone that science keeps stubbing its toe on. Pun intended. And honestly, not apologized for. Let's be honest about something nobody likes talking about at dinner parties. Prehistoric people performed surgery, brain surgery, with rocks. This is not a joke, not a metaphor, and not a loose interpretation of ambiguous evidence. The archaeological record contains hundreds of skulls from Europe, South America, Africa, and Asia, spanning thousands of years, with neat, deliberate holes in them. The procedure is called trepanation, and it involves cutting, scraping, or drilling through the skull to expose the brain underneath. And the truly disturbing part, the part that makes modern neurosurgeons pause and stare into the middle distance, is that many of these patients survived. We know they survived because the bone shows evidence of healing. New bone growth around the edges of the hole indicates that the person lived for weeks, months, sometimes years after the procedure. Some skulls show multiple trepanations, 2, 3, even 4 healed openings, which means the patient not only survived the first surgery, but came back for more, which is either a testament to the skill of the surgeon or the persuasiveness of prehistoric healthcare marketing. The tools were made of flint, obsidian, or sharpened shell. The anesthesia was, at best, a strong herbal preparation, possibly something derived from opium poppies, possibly something containing willow bark, possibly just a very large drink. The antiseptic procedures were non-existent by modern standards, and yet the survival rate for prehistoric trepanation, based on the evidence of healed skulls, appears to have been astonishingly high. Some estimates put it above 50%. Some go higher. For reference, the survival rate for trepanation in a modern European hospital in the 18th century, with trained surgeons, metal instruments, and several thousand years of additional medical knowledge, was significantly lower. Let that sink in. How? How did people with no formal medical training, no understanding of germ theory, and no surgical instruments beyond sharpened stones achieve outcomes that 18th century doctors couldn't match? The honest answer is, we're not entirely sure. Part of it may be speed. Prehistoric surgeons likely worked quickly, reducing the window for infection. Part of it may be environment. Open air or cave settings may have had lower concentrations of the specific bacteria that thrive in hospital wards. Part of it may be selection. Perhaps only the healthiest patients were chosen for the procedure. And part of it is almost certainly knowledge accumulated, tested, refined knowledge about technique, timing, and aftercare that was passed down through generations of practice and never written on a single page. Old Ember, sitting by the fire, has seen 3 trepanations in her lifetime. She assisted with 2 of them. She speaks about it the way a retired surgeon might speak about a particularly tricky operation, with professional detachment, quiet pride, and the occasional aside about how badly the patient behaved during recovery. Bright Teeth, characteristically, wants to know everything about the procedure and keeps asking questions that make everyone else visibly uncomfortable. Worm, who can nap a blade thin enough to shave with, has produced the tools for a trepanation but cannot bring himself to watch one. And Knuckle, who has killed cave bears with his bare hands, turns slightly pale at the mention of it. In the end, the mystery of trepanation isn't really about surgery. It's about knowledge, how it was developed, how it was transmitted, and how much of it vanished when the last person who held it in their memory died without passing it on. Somewhere in the unrecoverable past, there was a genius. Somebody who looked at a person in agony and thought, what if I opened the skull? And then did it. And somehow, it worked. And they taught someone else. And it kept working. And we have no idea who they were, or what else they knew. Let's talk about the place that changed everything we thought we knew. Or more accurately, the place that took everything we thought we knew, picked it up, looked at it, shook its head in disappointment, and gently set it back down, facing the wrong direction. Göbekli Tepe. If you haven't heard of Göbekli Tepe, here's the short version. It's a temple. A large, elaborately carved, architecturally sophisticated temple complex in southeastern Turkey. It was built around 9,600 BCE, possibly earlier, which makes it roughly 11,500 years old. That's about 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. About 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid. And here's the part that makes archaeologists' heads spin like a compass. Near a magnet, it was built by hunter-gatherers, people who had not yet invented agriculture, people who, according to every model of human development that existed before Göbekli Tepe was discovered, should not have been capable of building anything this complex. The site consists of massive, T-shaped stone pillars, up to 20 feet tall, and weighing up to 10 tons, arranged in circles and carved with detailed reliefs of animals. Foxes, snakes, boars, vultures, scorpions, lions. Some of the pillars have arms carved into them, suggesting they represent humanoid figures. The craftsmanship is precise, deliberate, and clearly the work of skilled specialists, people who did nothing but carve stone, which implies a level of social specialization that supposedly required agriculture and settlement to develop. The old model went like this. First, humans figured out farming. Farming created food surpluses. Food surpluses allowed some people to stop farming and specialize in other things: building, art, religion, administration. Those specialists built temples, monuments, and eventually cities. Civilization. The whole story was neat, logical, and satisfying, like a well-organized filing cabinet. Göbekli Tepe kicked the filing cabinet over. Because if hunter-gatherers built this temple before they invented farming, then the entire sequence is wrong, or at least incomplete. It suggests that the desire to build, to create monumental structures, to gather in large numbers for purposes that appear to be ritual or religious, didn't come after agriculture. It may have come before. It may even have driven the development of agriculture, the need to feed the workers. Building the temple might have pushed people toward cultivating crops. The monument didn't follow civilization. Civilization may have followed the monument. And then, and this is where the mystery deepens from merely staggering to genuinely eerie, they buried it, deliberately. Layer by layer, circle by circle, the builders of Göbekli Tepe filled in their creation with rubble and earth, sealing it underground where it stayed, untouched and forgotten, for over 10,000 years, until a Kurdish shepherd noticed some oddly shaped stones poking out of a hilltop in 1994. Why would you build something so extraordinary and then bury it? We don't know. Was it a sacrifice offering the temple to the gods by returning it to the earth? Was it a transition, one era ending, another beginning, the old beliefs literally put underground? Was it protection, preserving the site against desecration or destruction? The theories multiply, none of them quite satisfying, all of them gesturing toward a spiritual and social complexity that should not exist at this point in the timeline, but very clearly does. Bright Teeth would have loved Göbekli Tepe. You can see them now, crouching by the fire, chipping away at a piece of limestone, trying to carve a fox into it with a technique they're mostly inventing as they go. Old Ember watches, but says nothing. She's seen this before: the restlessness, the urge to make something permanent, to leave a mark that outlasts the person who makes it. It's the oldest human impulse, older than language, older than agriculture, possibly older than anything we'd recognize as religion. The need to say, I was here, this mattered, remember. Let's talk about your average day, because even in a world full of mysteries, somebody still has to do the washing up. You wake with the light, which in this latitude and season means you wake early not because you want to, but because the cave has no curtains, no blackout blinds, and no alarm clock, and the dawn comes in like it owns the place, which, in fairness, it does. The fire has burned down to embers overnight. Long Shadow was on watch and has already added fresh wood. The wolf pup is still asleep on your feet, radiating warmth like a small, furry, slightly smelly hot water bottle. You lie there for a moment, watching the smoke curl toward the cave ceiling, and you experience something your modern self almost never does: complete silence, no traffic, no notifications, no refrigerator hum, just wind and birdsong, and the distant sound of the river, and someone at the back of the cave coughing in their sleep. Then the day begins. The daily routine of a prehistoric community is not the formless, idle existence that popular culture sometimes imagines. It's structured, purposeful, and busy, but busy in a way that moves at a pace your modern brain finds simultaneously slower and more intense than anything you're used to. There are things to do, and the things need doing, but nobody is checking a clock, nobody is scheduling a meeting, and nobody is responding to emails, and the absence of these particular pressures creates a rhythm that is, surprisingly, almost meditative. First, there's the fire. Always the fire. It needs tending, feeding, coaxing. It is the single most important technology in camp, and treating it casually is the equivalent of leaving your front door open in a snowstorm. Someone is always watching it. This morning, that someone is Worm, who sits by the embers with the careful attention of a person who understands that the difference between a warm camp and a cold one is about 15 minutes of negligence. Then there's water fetched from the river in animal skin containers that are waterproof in theory and somewhat waterproof in practice. Then tool maintenance, checking edges, resharpening blades, replacing hafting on spears. Then food preparation, which is its own multi-hour operation involving sorting, cleaning, grinding, and the particular kind of resigned patience that comes from knowing that lunch is not going to make itself. The hunters leave mid-morning, knuckle leads, as always. Long Shadow reads the terrain ahead of them, moving with the fluid, unhurried gait of someone who knows that speed matters less than patience. They'll be gone for hours, possibly a day, and when they come back, they'll either be carrying meat or they won't. And either way, nobody will dramatize it. Because this is just how it works. Some days the hunt succeeds, some days it doesn't. The community survives on averages, not guarantees. Meanwhile, in camp, the rest of the work continues. Hides need scraping. Cordage needs twisting plant fibers, sinew, thin strips of leather braided into rope that's stronger than it looks and more versatile than any single tool. Children are minded, taught, supervised in the loose, communal way that characterizes childcare in small societies. Everyone's child is everyone's responsibility, which sounds utopian until you factor in that everyone's child is also everyone's problem. And through it all, there are long stretches of what modern productivity culture would call doing nothing, but which is actually something much more important: resting, talking, observing, thinking. These are people who spend significant portions of their day simply being present in their environment, watching the sky, listening to the forest, reading subtle changes in wind and temperature and animal behavior that tell them things about the coming days that no weather app could match. The modern obsession with constant activity would baffle them. They know something you've forgotten, that rest is not waste, it's preparation. And in a world where tomorrow might require everything you've got, sitting quietly today is the smartest thing you can do. Let's talk about what gets you in trouble. Because every community, no matter how small, no matter how egalitarian, has its fault lines, the behaviors that earn disapproval, the offenses that trigger consequences, and the unforgivable acts that result in the one punishment nobody wants to contemplate: exile. Being asked to leave a group of 30 people in the Pleistocene is not like being fired from a job. It's a death sentence delivered politely. Humans are social animals. A lone human in the Ice Age landscape is prey, and everyone knows it. The minor offenses are familiar: laziness, not pulling your weight on the daily tasks; gossip, spreading information that damages relationships; poor hygiene, even by the relaxed standards of 35,000 BCE. There's a baseline, and falling below it attracts comment. Disrespect toward elders, particularly Old Ember, whose patience is legendary, but not infinite. These infractions earn you cold looks, reduced portions, and the particular kind of social discomfort that humans have been deploying as a corrective measure for as long as there have been humans: the deliberate withdrawal of warmth and attention until you get the message. The serious offenses are fewer and starker. theft from the communal stores, a betrayal of the sharing compact that holds the group together. Violence against a group member tolerated only in highly specific, ritualized contexts, and never against someone weaker. And the big one, the one that crosses every line: sexual violence. The evidence from prehistoric societies, reconstructed from anthropological analogy with modern hunter-gatherer groups, suggests that sexual coercion was met with immediate collective punishment. Because in a group this small, the bonds between members are not abstract concepts, they are survival infrastructure. Damage one, and you damage all. The enforcement mechanism isn't a court. It isn't a police force. It's the group itself, 30 pairs of eyes that see everything, 30 memories that forget nothing, and the collective, unspoken authority to include or exclude, that is, in its way. The most powerful judicial system humans have ever devised. You don't need a prison when the wilderness is the prison. You don't need a judge when judgment is unanimous. And there's a mystery here, too, because the social structures that maintained order in prehistoric communities, the norms, the taboos, the codes of conduct were transmitted orally across thousands of years with a consistency that implies something more than just habit. Prehistoric communities, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, show remarkably similar social patterns, similar sharing rules, similar respect for elders, similar treatment of the dead, similar responses to transgression. Is this convergent cultural evolution? Is it inherited from a common ancestral culture so old it predates the migration of modern humans out of Africa? Or is it something deeper, something hardwired into the species, a social grammar as innate as language? The question is open. The debate is ongoing. And Knuckle, who once broke a man's arm for stealing dried meat and felt bad about it for months afterward, probably isn't interested in the theoretical framework. He just knows what's right. And in a world without written laws, sometimes knowing is enough. Let's talk about the drawings that nobody should be able to see. Because if the cave paintings are mysterious and the megaliths are baffling, the Nazca lines are something else entirely, something that sits right on the border between impressive and impossible, and leans over just far enough to make your brain itch. The Nazca lines are geoglyphs, enormous figures and geometric shapes etched into the desert floor of southern Peru. They were created by removing the reddish-brown surface stones to reveal the lighter ground beneath, a process that sounds simple until you consider the scale. The hummingbird is over 300 feet long. The spider is 150 feet. The monkey, with its improbably spiraled tail, stretches across 100 feet of flat desert. There are straight lines that run for miles, perfectly straight, across terrain that is anything but flat. They were made by the Nazca people between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE. And here's the mystery that has driven researchers to distraction since they were first spotted from an aeroplane in the 1920s. The figures are only fully visible from the air. From ground level, you're inside them, and all you see are shallow trenches running in directions that seem random. You cannot appreciate what you're making while you're making it. Which raises the obvious question, who were they for? The alien theory, let's address it immediately, is nonsense. It's the kind of nonsense that feels satisfying because it provides a clean answer to a messy question, but it does so by insulting the intelligence and capability of the actual humans who did the actual work. The Nazca people were sophisticated, skilled, and more than capable of creating these figures using simple surveying techniques, stakes, cords, and careful planning. The how is not the mystery. The why is. Were they offerings to the gods visible from the sky, where the gods presumably lived? Were they ritual pathways walked during ceremonies, their meaning experienced from within rather than above? Were they astronomical markers aligned with stars, solstices, celestial events? Were they maps of underground water sources, a theory that has gained traction in recent years and has some genuinely compelling evidence behind it? Were they all of these things? Were they none of them? The answer, once again, is we don't know. We don't know because the Nazca left no written records, no explanatory texts, no instruction manual titled Why We're Drawing a 300-Foot Hummingbird in the Desert, a practical guide. They left only the drawings themselves, enormous and silent, lying in a desert so dry that they've survived for 2,000 years with barely a scratch. The desert preserved them, the way the best filing systems always do by accident, not design. And there's something gently comforting about that. Not every mystery needs solving. Some things can simply be witnessed, appreciated, and left alone. The hummingbird doesn't need an explanation. It just needs someone to look at it from a plane, from a satellite, from the quietness of your own bed and think, someone made this. Someone spent weeks, maybe months, creating something they could never fully see, for reasons they never explained, and it's still here. And honestly, in a world that demands explanations for everything, there's something deeply restful about a mystery that simply exists. Let's talk about hands. Not hands in general. Your hands are fine, thank you, and you're going to need them later for pulling the blanket up, but specific hands, the ones on the walls. Because scattered across caves on nearly every inhabited continent, from France to Indonesia to Argentina to Australia, there are hand stencils, thousands of them, tens of thousands, possibly. And they are, in a way that the grand animal paintings and the megalithic temples sometimes aren't, intensely, almost uncomfortably personal. The technique is simple. You place your hand flat against the cave wall. You take a mouthful of pigment ochre mixed with water, charcoal suspended in saliva, manganese ground to powder, and you blow. The pigment sprays around your fingers, coating the wall, leaving a negative image of your hand in the clean stone underneath. You lift your hand away, and there it is. Your hand. Your actual, specific, individual hand, with its particular spread of fingers and its particular proportions and its particular creases, preserved on stone for longer than any building, any monument, any written word will ever last. The oldest known hand stencils are in caves on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, and they are at least 40,000 years old, which makes them among the earliest known examples of art anywhere on Earth. Created at roughly the same time as the cave paintings at Chauvet in France, on the opposite side of the planet. The coincidence, or rather the non-coincidence, is staggering, because it suggests that the impulse to leave a mark, to press your hand against stone and say, "I was here," is not a cultural invention that spread from one place to another, but something deeper, something innate, something that multiple groups of humans arrived at independently, because the urge is built into the species the way language is built into the species and laughter is built into the species. And here's where it gets strange. Many of the hand stencils, a disproportionate number, across multiple sites, on multiple continents, appear to show hands with missing fingers. Fingers that are bent, or shortened, or absent entirely. The debate over what this means has been running for decades and shows no sign of resolution. Were these people suffering from frostbite? Were the fingers deliberately amputated as part of a ritual? Were they simply bent when the stencil was made, creating the appearance of absence? Were these the hands of people with congenital conditions? And if so, does the prevalence of such stencils tell us something about who was allowed or expected to make them? Old Ember's hands, you've noticed, are remarkable. Long-fingered, steady, the knuckles swollen with age, but the grip still firm. She has placed her hand on the cave wall twice in her life. She tells you once when she was young, and once when she became what she is. Both stencils are still there, deep in the cave, side by side, one hand smaller than the other, both unmistakably hers. She doesn't explain what they mean, and you don't ask, because some things are understood by context and expression, and the particular quality of silence that surrounds them, and asking would be like asking someone to explain why they cry at music. The answer is true, but it isn't the truth. The hand stencils are the most democratic mystery in prehistory. The megaliths required organization, labor, leadership. The cave paintings required skill, talent, training. But anyone can make a hand stencil. Anyone. A child, an elder, a hunter, a dreamer, a person with all their fingers and a person without. All you need is a wall, some pigment, and breath. And the result is the most direct physical connection between you and someone who lived 40,000 years ago. Their hand, the same size as yours, pressed against stone in the dark, preserved by accident and indifference, and the patient chemistry of mineral and rock, waiting for someone to find it and understand, without any words at all, what it means, which is, I was here. I existed. Remember me. And honestly, lying in the dark yourself, breathing quietly, your own hands resting on the covers, you probably understand that better than any archaeologist ever could. Let's talk about the sky. Not the sky as you know it, the washed out, light-polluted, barely visible scattering of stars that you might glimpse between buildings if you remember to look up. The sky as it was. The sky as it has been for almost all of human history, a vast, overwhelming, absurdly detailed canopy of light that stretches from horizon to horizon with the kind of clarity that makes you understand, viscerally, why every ancient culture on Earth decided the sky was where the gods lived. Because, honestly, if you'd never seen a city, never heard of astronomy, never learned the word star, and you walked out of your cave one night and saw that, you'd think it was divine, too. Prehistoric people knew the sky. Not casually, not approximately, but with a precision and depth that continues to surprise researchers who spend their careers studying it. The evidence is scattered across thousands of years and dozens of cultures, and it all points in the same direction. These people were watching, tracking, recording, and using the movements of celestial bodies in ways that imply a systematic, sustained, intergenerational program of observation that makes a modern astronomy department look like a casual hobby. Consider this. Bone artifacts from the Upper Paleolithic, 30,000 years ago and more, have been found with notches and marks that some researchers believe represent lunar cycle tracking. Not random scratches, deliberate, sequential marks that correspond to the phases of the moon across months. If this interpretation is correct, and it's debated, because everything in this field is debated, then humans were recording astronomical data before they were planting crops, building permanent structures, or making pottery. The sky came first. At Stonehenge, the alignment of the stones with the solstice sunrise and sunset has been known for centuries, but the sophistication goes deeper. Recent research suggests the monument may encode a solar calendar, a system of dividing the year into months and weeks, using the stones as counting markers. At Newgrange, in Ireland, built around 3200 BCE, older than the pyramids, a narrow passage is aligned so precisely that on the winter solstice, and only on the winter solstice, sunlight travels the full length of the passage and illuminates the back chamber for exactly 17 minutes. The precision required to achieve this is staggering. It implies years, possibly decades, of observation before a single stone was laid. And this is where the mystery crystallizes. How did they do it? Not the building, but the observing. How did people without telescopes, without mathematics as we know it, without writing, track and predict celestial events with this kind of accuracy? The answer, almost certainly, involves vast stretches of patient, systematic observation, night after night, year after year, generation after generation, with each generation refining the knowledge of the previous one. It's the ultimate long-term project, and it was conducted entirely inside human memory, transmitted entirely by voice, and achieved results that rival anything produced by modern instruments. Long Shadow, you notice, watches the sky every night. He lies on his back at the edge of the overhang, the wolf pup curled against his side, and stares upward with the quiet concentration of someone who is not just looking, but reading. He knows things about the stars that old Ember taught him, and that old Ember was taught by someone before her, and that person was taught by someone else. And the chain extends backward into a depth of time that makes your head swim. He doesn't call it astronomy. He doesn't call it anything. He just watches. And the sky watches back, the same way it always has, the same way it will tonight, above your bed, even if you can't see it through the ceiling. Let's talk about the wolf. Not the wolf pup, though the pup is still here, currently asleep in a patch of sunlight with all four legs pointing in different directions like a furry compass that's given up. The wolf. The concept of the wolf. The moment in human history when someone looked at a wild predator, an animal equipped with jaws that can crush bone, speed that can outrun a human, and a social intelligence that makes it one of the most effective pack hunters on the planet, and thought, I bet we could be friends. The domestication of the wolf, the transformation from wild predator to companion animal, from wolf to dog, is one of the most significant events in human history, and one of the most poorly understood. We know it happened. We know it happened a very long time ago. Estimates range from 15,000 to 40,000 years ago, depending on which genetic study you trust and how many cups of coffee the researcher had when they wrote it up. We know it happened at least once, possibly multiple times in different locations. And we know the result. The dog, humanity's oldest and most successful interspecies partnership, a relationship so deep and so enduring that it has shaped both species in ways neither fully appreciates. But we don't really know how it happened. The old theory was deliberate domestication. Humans captured wolf pups, raised them, bred the tamest ones, and gradually created a new animal over generations. It's a nice theory. It's clean, logical, and it positions humans as the active agents, which humans tend to like. The problem is that wolves are not easy to tame. Even wolf pups, raised from birth by experienced handlers, retain wild instincts that make them unreliable, unpredictable, and occasionally dangerous. The idea that Pleistocene hunter-gatherers, living in survival conditions, would invest the time and resources to tame an animal that might eat their children is, to put it gently, optimistic. The alternative theory, and the one gaining ground, is self-domestication. Wolves domesticated themselves. The theory goes like this. Human camps produce waste. Waste attracts scavengers. The boldest, least fearful wolves began hanging around human camps, feeding on scraps and refuse. Over time, the wolves that tolerated human proximity survived and bred, while the ones that didn't were driven off. Natural selection, acting on temperament rather than physical traits, gradually produced a population of wolves that was comfortable around humans and humans. Recognizing the benefits of having a large predator hanging around camp, guarding against other predators, alerting to danger, being warm to sleep next to, tolerated, and eventually encouraged their presence. The wolf pup on your feet is probably somewhere in the middle of this process, not quite wild, not quite tame, existing in the blurred boundary between two species that are still figuring out the terms of their arrangement. It follows you when you move. It sleeps against you at night. It watches the hunters leave and waits for them to return with an intensity that suggests it understands, on some level, that their success is also its success. But it still flinches when Knuckle moves too quickly. It still growls at strangers. It still has one paw in the wild and one paw in the camp. And the distance between those two paws is the distance between wolf and dog, between wild and domestic, between the world before and the world after. And here's the human truth at the center of it. The relationship between humans and wolves, and later dogs, is a mystery because it's built on something that doesn't fossilize: trust. You can dig up bones. You can carbon date remains. You can analyze ancient DNA. But you can't excavate the moment when a wolf looked at a human and decided to stay, or the moment when a human looked at a wolf and decided not to throw a rock. That moment, quiet, unremarkable, probably involving nothing more dramatic than a shared meal and a warm fire, changed both species forever. And nobody recorded it because nobody knew it mattered. The most important moments rarely announce themselves. They just happen, and then everything is different. Let's talk about sound. Not the sounds of the prehistoric world, the wind, the river, the crackle of fire, the distant howl of wolves that your wolf pup responds to with a confused little whimper that suggests an identity crisis in progress. Those sounds are everywhere and constant. What we're talking about now is something stranger. The sounds that ancient people built into stone. Because here's a detail about prehistoric monuments that doesn't get nearly enough attention. They have acoustics, remarkable acoustics. Acoustics that appear, in at least some cases, to have been deliberately engineered. At Stonehenge, studies have shown that the arrangement of the stones creates specific acoustic effects. Sounds produced inside the circle are amplified and reflected in ways that make a human voice carry further and resonate longer than it would in Barna. Open air. The stone circle functions, in effect, as a natural amphitheater. Was this intentional? The evidence is suggestive, but not conclusive. It's possible that the builders designed for sound the way they designed for celestial alignment with purpose and precision. It's also possible that the acoustic effects are a happy coincidence, a side effect of the geometry. And the honest answer is that we can't tell the difference, because both scenarios produce the same result. But the caves are harder to dismiss. Research conducted in painted caves across France and Spain has found a striking correlation between the locations of cave paintings and the acoustic properties of the cave chambers. The most elaborately painted sections of caves tend to be the ones with the best acoustics chambers, where sound reverberates, echoes, and transforms in ways that are, even by modern standards, impressive. In some chambers, a single voice can produce overtones that sound like multiple voices singing in harmony. In others, A rhythmic beat, a drum, a stamped foot, a clapped hand creates patterns of echo that pulse and build in ways that are, quite frankly, hypnotic. The implication is extraordinary. If the correlation is causal, if prehistoric artists deliberately chose acoustically rich chambers for their paintings, then the caves weren't just galleries. They were performance spaces, multisensory environments where visual art and sound combined to create experiences that we might, without too much stretch, call immersive. The flickering light of an animal fat lamp, the painted animals appearing to move in the shifting shadows, the deep reverberating sound of a voice or a drum echoing off limestone walls. Close your eyes and imagine it. Now imagine experiencing it for the first time, in an era when the closest thing to entertainment was watching a sunset, and the closest thing to technology was a sharpened rock. Worm, quiet worm, who barely speaks above a whisper in camp, once led you deep into the cave to a chamber where the walls are covered with painted horses. In the absolute darkness, with only the small lamp between you, he tapped a stalactite with a piece of flint. The sound it made was a clear, resonant note, a G, or something close to it, that hung in the air for seconds, layering over itself, building, until the chamber hummed with it. Worm looked at you and, for the first time in your memory, smiled. He tapped another stalactite, a different note. Then, another. He was playing the cave. The cave was an instrument, and Worm knew exactly how to play it, because someone had shown him, and someone had shown them, and the music went back further than anyone could remember. In the end, the mystery of prehistoric sound is the mystery of prehistoric experience. What did it feel like to be alive in a world without recorded music, without speakers, without headphones, where every sound was live and every resonance was discovered, not designed? What did it feel like to stand in a painted cave and hear your own voice come back to you, transformed, multiplied, made strange and beautiful by stone that had been shaped by water over millions of years? We'll never know. But lying in the dark, listening to the hum of your own fan, you can almost imagine it. Let's talk about the ones who disappeared. Because if there's anything more unsettling than a mystery you can't solve, it's a mystery that involves an entire group of people who simply ceased to exist, leaving behind their tools, their buildings, their art, and absolutely no explanation for where they went or why. Prehistoric and ancient history is full of disappearances, cultures that flourished for centuries and then vanished, communities that built, farmed, traded, and thrived, and then stopped, as if someone flipped a switch. And in almost every case, the evidence tells us what happened: climate change, drought, overhunting, disease, warfare, migration, but not quite enough of what happened, leaving a gap where certainty should be and a mystery where closure belongs. Take the Clovis people. For decades, the Clovis culture, named for their distinctive fluted stone spear points, first found near Clovis, New Mexico, were considered the first humans in the Americas, arriving via the Bering Land Bridge roughly 13,000 years ago. Their tools were everywhere. Their presence was undeniable. And then, about 12,800 years ago, they disappeared. The Clovis points stop appearing in the archaeological record. The culture, as a recognizable entity, simply ends. What happened? Climate change is the leading candidate, the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to near-glacial conditions that lasted over 1,000 years, would have devastated the ecosystems that the Clovis people depended on. The megafauna they hunted, mammoths, mastodons, Giant ground sloths were going extinct, possibly partly because of overhunting, possibly because of the changing climate, probably because of both. The Clovis people didn't vanish, exactly. They adapted, changed, became something else. Their descendants are almost certainly among the diverse cultures that populated the Americas in subsequent millennia. But the Clovis culture, as a coherent, identifiable thing, ended, and the transition was sharp enough to leave a visible gap in the record. Or, consider the people who built the megalithic temples of Malta, the Gantiha temples, the Charchim, the Mnidra, enormous stone structures built between 3,600 and 2,500 BCE, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, among the oldest freestanding stone buildings on Earth. The people who built them created a sophisticated civilization on a small Mediterranean island, and then they disappeared. By 2350 BCE, the temples were abandoned. The culture was gone. A new population arrived centuries later and found the temples standing empty, already ancient, already mysterious. Where did they go? Environmental collapse is one theory. Soil depletion, deforestation, drought, disease is another. Migration, conflict, gradual decline, all possible, none proven. The temples remain, massive and silent, waiting for an explanation that may never come. And this is the recurring theme of prehistoric disappearances. The monuments outlast the builders. The stones remain when the people do not. The art survives when the artists are forgotten. And the mystery isn't really about what killed them or drove them away. It's about the fragility of everything humans build, including themselves. A culture that lasted for 1,000 years can vanish in a generation. Knowledge accumulated over millennia can be lost in a single bad century. And the things that survive, the stones, the bones, the paintings in the dark, are never the things that mattered most. The songs don't survive. The stories don't survive. The names don't survive. Only the silence does, and the questions it leaves behind. Long Shadow is telling a story tonight, sitting by the fire, his voice low and rhythmic, the wolf pup asleep in his lap. You don't understand all of it. The language is dense and elusive, full of references to people and places you haven't learned yet, but you understand enough to know it's old. Older than Long Shadow. Older than Old Ember. A story passed down through so many generations that its original context has been worn smooth, like a river stone, leaving only the shape. You wonder, briefly, whether this story will survive, whether someone, 10,000 years from now, will tell it. You suspect not. But Long Shadow tells it anyway, because the telling is the point. The telling is always the point. Let's talk about the things that shouldn't exist. Not in a conspiracy theory way, not in the ancient aliens built it way that insults every prehistoric craftsperson who ever lived. In the genuine, peer-reviewed, published in respectable journals way. Because the archaeological record contains objects and structures that do not fit neatly into our timelines, that demonstrate skills and knowledge we didn't think existed when they were created, and that remind us, with gentle but persistent force, that the gap between what we know about the past and what actually happened is considerably wider than we're comfortable admitting. Consider the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel, carved from mammoth ivory roughly 40,000 years ago. It's a 12-inch figurine depicting a human body with a lion's head. It is, as far as we know, the oldest known example of figurative art, an object that represents something other than itself, that combines two real things into something imaginary. This isn't just a carving. It's evidence of abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, Imagination, the ability to conceive of something that doesn't exist and then make it real. And it happened 40,000 years ago, carved by someone sitting in a cave in what is now Germany, using stone tools, working by firelight, with no idea that they were producing evidence of a cognitive revolution that would reshape our understanding of human evolution. Consider the Ishango bone, a baboon fibula found in the Democratic Republic of Congo, dating to roughly 20,000 years ago, covered in grouped notches that some mathematicians believe represent mathematical sequences. If this interpretation is correct, it's the oldest known mathematical artifact, not counting, not tallying. Mathematics, patterns, sequences, abstraction. 20,000 years ago. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, though this one pushes into the edges of prehistoric and into the ancient world around 100 BCE. It's a corroded bronze device recovered from a shipwreck off the Greek coast that turns out to be, essentially, an analog computer. It tracked the movements of the sun, the moon, the planets, and predicted eclipses and even the timing of the ancient Olympic Games. The level of mechanical precision required to build it was not matched by any known technology for over 1,000 years. It shouldn't exist, but it does. And there's only one, which raises the unsettling possibility that it wasn't unique, that there were others, now lost, and that an entire tradition of mechanical engineering existed and vanished so completely that this single surviving example looks like a miracle rather than what it probably was, the product of a long, sophisticated, now lost tradition. Bright Teeth is doing it again, sitting at the edge of the firelight, tongue poking out in concentration, trying to carve something into a piece of antler that doesn't look like anything yet but will, eventually, become something. A bird, maybe. A fish. Something that exists only in Bright Teeth's head, until it exists in ivory, and then exists forever. Or at least until someone finds it in a museum 35,000 years from now and writes a paper about it. The creative impulse doesn't wait for civilization. It doesn't wait for cities or writing or institutions. It's there, in the firelight, in the hands of a teenager who has never heard the word art and doesn't need to. The making is enough. It's always been enough. Let's set the scene. The weather is changing. You noticed it this morning, a heaviness in the air, a particular quality to the light that Long Shadow identified with a single glance and a slow shake of his head. Storm. A big one. Coming fast. The camp shifts into a mode you haven't seen before. Not panic, because panic wastes energy, and these people don't waste anything but a controlled urgency, a tightening of routine, an acceleration of all the small tasks that normally unfold at their own pace. Hides are secured. The fire is banked and shielded. Food stores are moved deeper into the overhang. Children are gathered. The wolf pup, sensing the change in atmosphere, presses close to your legs and whines, very quietly, in a register that suggests it has opinions about the weather but knows better than to share them at full volume. And then the storm hits. It's not like modern storms, not like the storms you've experienced. Anyway, muffled by walls and glass and central heating and the general insulation of modern existence. This storm is immediate. The wind comes first, slamming into the overhang with a force that makes the fire flatten and spit. Then the rain, horizontal, cold, relentless, driven sideways by a wind that seems personally motivated. The temperature drops. The noise is enormous. Thunder rolls across the valley in slow, heavy waves that you feel in your chest before you hear them. And lightning turns the landscape into a series of frozen photographs. The river, swollen and dark. The trees, bent nearly horizontal. The sky, purple, black, and furious. You are technically sheltered. The overhang provides protection from the worst of the rain, and the fire, though diminished, is still burning. But the cold gets in, the damp gets in, the sound gets in, and there's nothing to do but sit and wait and endure. Because this is a world where the weather is not an inconvenience, it's a force. It can kill you. And the only defense is patience, preparation, and the company of other people who have survived this before and know, without being told, that it ends. It always ends. Old Ember sits perfectly still through the whole thing, her bone ornaments clicking softly in the wind, her eyes half closed, her breathing slow. She's weathered storms that would make this one look like a light shower. Knuckle paces. Worm huddles over his toolkit, protecting the flint from moisture with his own body. Bright Teeth, predictably, is trying to watch the lightning and keeps having to be pulled back from the edge of the overhang by Long Shadow, who does this with the weary patience of someone who has been preventing Bright Teeth from killing themselves since approximately forever. The storm lasts hours. When it finally passes, the world outside is washed, gleaming, every surface beaded with water that catches the returning sunlight and turns the valley into something that looks, briefly, like the inside of a cathedral. The air smells of ozone, of wet earth, of something clean and ancient. The river roars. The birds return, cautiously, one by one. And the camp resumes, as if nothing happened. Because nothing happened, nothing unusual, nothing unprecedented, nothing that hasn't happened before and won't happen again. The storm is not a crisis, it's a feature, part of the landscape, part of the life, and the ability to endure it, to sit through it without breaking, to come out the other side and immediately get back to work. That's not survival. That's mastery. And it's a mastery that requires no technology, no infrastructure, no institution, just the quiet, accumulated toughness of people who have been living with the weather, inside the weather, for longer than anyone can remember. Let's talk about dreams. Not the dreams you have at night, though you've been having strange ones since you arrived here, full of animals and fire, and the particular shade of ochre that Old Ember uses to mark important things. These dreams are different. These are the waking dreams. The ones that happen when the work is done and the fire is low and the night is long, and someone staring into the embers starts to imagine what else might be out there. Because the people around you are not unaware that there's more to the world than this valley. They trade with groups from the coast. The shells that Old Ember wears came from somewhere far away, passed hand to hand across hundreds of miles, through networks of exchange that span regions and connect communities that will never meet face to face. They know that the world extends beyond the horizon. They know there are other rivers, other mountains, other peoples, and some of them, you can see it in their eyes when the firelight catches them a certain way. I wonder what it would be like to go. Long Shadow is one of them. He's a tracker, born and built for movement, and the settled life of the camp fits him the way a cage fits a bird technically containing him, but not quite designed for the purpose. He talks, sometimes, in the oblique way of someone who knows that what he's saying is socially complicated about places he's heard of from traders. A valley where the river runs warm, a plateau where the stone is a color nobody here has ever seen, a coast where the water stretches to the edge of the world. He doesn't say he wants to go. He just describes these places with a precision and a longing that makes the not saying louder than any declaration. Bright Teeth's escape fantasy is different, less geographical, more conceptual. Bright Teeth wants to know, not anything specific, everything. how the stars move, why the seasons change, what makes fire, where the dead go, why some stones flake into blades and others crumble into dust. The questions are constant, relentless, and occasionally dangerous, because some of the questions touch on territory that old Ember considers sacred. And asking sacred questions too loudly is one of those social offenses that earns you a look that could curdle milk at 50 paces. But Bright Teeth can't stop asking, because curiosity isn't a choice. It's a compulsion. It's the same compulsion that drove someone to paint the first animal on a cave wall, to carve the first figurine, to look at a wolf and think, friend, to look at an enormous stone and think, I wonder if we could move that. Worm's dream is smaller and, in its way, more poignant. Worm dreams of making something perfect. Not useful Worm's tools are already useful, already the best in the group, already the subject of quiet admiration from people who understand how difficult the work is, but perfect. A blade so thin it's translucent, a point so symmetrical it looks grown, not made. Worm has been chasing this dream for years, and every piece of flint is another attempt, and every attempt gets closer. And the gap between very good and perfect is the gap that drives all artisans in every era to keep working long after anyone else would have stopped. These dreams of elsewhere, of knowledge, of perfection are not survival strategies. They don't put food on the fire or keep the rain out. They are, in the most practical sense, useless. And yet they are, in every sense that matters, the engine of everything that comes after. Every monument, every migration, every invention, every mystery that science still cannot explain started here in the quiet, private, flickering dream of someone who looked at the world as it was and imagined it as something else. The dreamers don't build civilization. They create the conditions in which civilization becomes inevitable. And that's a mystery, too. Why we dream at all. Why we can't stop. Why the species that survived the Ice Age is also the species that paints horses on cave walls and moves 80-ton stones across continents for reasons it can't explain. The wolf pup twitches in its sleep, legs paddling against nothing, chasing something only it can see. Even the wolf dreams. It's good company. Let's not forget something. In all the discussion of mysteries and monuments and surgeries and paintings, it's easy to lose sight of the most important thing, which is this. These people were tough. Not tough in the modern sense, not gym tough, not marathon tough, not I did a cold plunge tough. Tough in the sense that they woke up every morning in a world that was actively, enthusiastically, and creatively trying to kill them. And they didn't just survive it, they thrived in it. For tens of thousands of years, long enough to develop art, language, medicine, astronomy, architecture, and a social complexity that we're still trying to understand. Think about what that requires. Not just physical strength, though the physical strength was considerable. Skeletal evidence suggests that a typical Upper Paleolithic human was more robust, more muscular, and more physically capable than any modern human outside of professional athletics. Think about the mental toughness, the emotional resilience, the sheer, grinding, daily discipline of staying alive in an environment with no safety net, no emergency services, no backup plan, and no second chances. Every meal was earned. Every shelter was built. Every tool was made by hand, from raw materials sourced from the landscape, using techniques that took years to master. Every injury was treated with whatever was available, which was sometimes nothing. Every loss a child, a parent, a friend, was absorbed, grieved, and carried forward, because stopping was not an option, and the world does not pause for sorrow. And they did all of this while simultaneously, and this is the part that gets me creating beauty, because that's what the cave paintings are, that's what the carvings are, that's what the megaliths are, in some fundamental sense beautiful. Not accidentally beautiful, not beautiful as a side effect of functionality, but intentionally, deliberately, at great personal cost, beautiful. Someone who was already working every daylight hour just to stay alive took additional time and effort they could have spent resting, or eating, or preparing for the next hunt, and used it to make something that served no survival purpose whatsoever, except to be seen, to be experienced, to exist. That's not primitive. That's not simple. That's the most human thing any human has ever done. Knuckle, who kills animals for food and has scars to prove it, spends his evenings carving small animals from bone. They're not very good. Honestly, they look like the work of someone with enormous hands and limited patience, but he makes them anyway, one after another, and gives them to the children who treasure them with the particular intensity of children who have very few possessions and value every one. Knuckle doesn't call this art. He doesn't call it anything. He just makes the things and hands them over and goes back to sharpening his spear. And if you tried to tell him that what he's doing is creative expression, he'd probably give you one of his communicative grunts and go back to work. But it is creative expression. It is the same impulse that painted the cave walls, that carved the Lion Man, that built Göbekli Tepe, that drew the Nazca hummingbird. The impulse to make something that doesn't need to exist. The impulse to add beauty to a world that provides none on demand. The impulse that, more than any tool or weapon or survival strategy, defines what it means to be human. And the mystery, the real mystery, the one that underlies all the others, is where that impulse comes from. Why do we make things? Why do we build monuments we can't explain? Why do we paint animals on walls we'll never show to anyone? Why do we look at the sky and try to map it? Why do we dream? The answer, of course, is that we don't know. And the not knowing is, in its own way, the most human thing of all. Let's talk about connection. Because for all the mysteries of stone and paint and sky, the deepest mystery of prehistoric life is also the most ordinary. How did these people love each other? How did they form bonds, maintain relationships, raise children, grieve losses, and sustain the emotional infrastructure of a community across years and decades and generations, all without therapists, relationship counselors, self-help books, or the phrase, "I think we need to talk"? The evidence is indirect but compelling. Burials tell us something. At Sungir in Russia, a grave dating to roughly 34,000 years ago contains the bodies of two children, laid head to head, covered in thousands of ivory beads, each bead individually carved, polished, and sewn onto clothing. The beads alone represent an estimated 10,000 hours of labor. 10,000 hours for two children who died young. That is not indifference. That is not primitive. That is love expressed through the only medium available: time, effort, beauty, care. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal burial from roughly 60,000 years ago. Yes, Neanderthals, our close relatives. Not even our own species contains a body surrounded by pollen from flowers. Somebody gathered flowers and placed them with the dead. The debate over whether this constitutes intentional burial practice or accidental contamination has raged for decades. But the possibility that a Neanderthal 60,000 years ago placed flowers on a grave is enough to stop you in your tracks and reconsider everything you thought you knew about who these people were. In your own camp, connection looks like this. It looks like old ember braiding a child's hair with patient, repetitive strokes while telling a story that is probably educational but feels like a lullaby. It looks like Knuckle and Long Shadow sitting in companionable silence after a hunt, saying nothing, needing nothing. The bond between them so established that words would be redundant. It looks like Worm handing Bright Teeth a finished blade and watching, with an expression that might be pride and might be anxiety, but is certainly some form of care, as Bright Teeth tests the edge and nods in approval. It looks like the group, all of them, gathering around the fire when the night is coldest and the dark is deepest, pressed close enough to share warmth, close enough to hear each other breathe. Not because they have to, because they want to, because the fire isn't just heat and light, it's the center. It's the place where stories are told, and decisions are made, and children fall asleep, and old people remember, and the whole fragile, remarkable, improbable experiment of human community continues. One night at a time, one story at a time, one generation at a time. The mystery isn't whether prehistoric people loved. They did. The mystery is whether we, with all our technology and all our progress and all our understanding, love any better. And the honest answer, the one that old Ember would give you if you asked, with a look that suggests you should already know, is probably not. Probably exactly the same. Probably the same messy, fierce, imperfect, magnificent love that has been keeping humans alive since before anyone thought to paint a horse on a wall, or stack a stone on top of another stone, or look up at the stars and wonder, let's slow down now. The fire is low, the camp is quiet. The children are asleep, scattered among the adults like small, warm punctuation marks in a long, breathing sentence. Old Ember has stopped talking. Knuckle is asleep, or close to it, his enormous hands resting on his knees, the scar on his eyebrow smooth in the firelight. Worm is turning a piece of flint over and over in his hands, not working it, just feeling the weight, the temperature, the grain. Long Shadow is watching the sky. The wolf pup is dreaming again, its paws twitching, its breath coming in small, soft gusts. And you're lying here, on your reed bed, under a hide that smells of smoke and animal and time. And the stars above the cave mouth are so dense and so bright that the sky looks less like a sky and more like a ceiling made of light. And you're thinking about all of it, the paintings, the stones, the surgery, the temples, the lines in the desert, the stars that someone mapped without instruments, the wolves that became dogs, the sounds in the caves, the people who vanished, the objects that shouldn't exist, the dreams that turned into civilizations. And you're thinking, we still don't understand any of it. Not really. Not completely. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the mystery isn't a failure of science. Maybe it's a feature of being human. Maybe the reason we can't fully explain the cave paintings or the megaliths or the trepanations isn't that we haven't tried hard enough or haven't found the right evidence. Maybe it's that the people who created these things were motivated by something that doesn't leave a trace in the archaeological record: emotion, belief, wonder, the private, unrecordable experience of being alive and curious and scared and creative in a world that provides no answers to the biggest questions. Maybe the mysteries are what's left when the human part of the story, the part that mattered most to the people who lived it, doesn't survive. The stones survive. The paint survives. The bones survive. but the why, the reason, the meaning, the feeling that lived in minds and voices and stories that were never written down. And when those minds stopped thinking, and those voices stopped speaking, and those stories stopped being told, the why went with them. And we're left with the what, which is astonishing and beautiful and endlessly fascinating, but which will never be the whole story. The fire crackles. Something shifts in the darkness outside the cave. An animal, probably, moving through the wet undergrowth. Long shadow glances toward the sound, then away, unconcerned. He's heard 1,000 such sounds. They all mean the same thing. The world is alive, and it is going about its business, and it does not require your attention. You can rest. Bright teeth, curled up near the wall, mumble something in their sleep. You can't make it out. It might be a word, might be a name, might be nothing. The wolf pup's ears twitch toward the sound, and then flatten again. Somebody else in the group shifts, sighs, settles. The fire dims by another shade. The mysteries are still there. They'll still be there tomorrow and next year, and in 10,000 years. When someone with technologies you can't imagine will dig into this hillside and find the bones and the tools and the paintings and the ashes of this fire, and ask the same questions you're asking now. Who were these people? What did they know? Why did they do what they did? And the answers will be, as they always are, we're not sure. We think, we believe, possibly, probably, and in a manner of speaking. And that, strangely, is comforting, because it means the story isn't over. It means there's always more to find, more to understand, more to wonder about. The mysteries don't close. They open, and the opening is the invitation, the same invitation that drew someone into a dark cave with a lamp made of fat and a handful of pigment 35,000 years ago. Come in, look, see what's here, and then tell someone. So here you are, still breathing, still warm, still lying in a world that smells considerably better than the one you just left. You've been through quite a lot tonight. You've slept on reed beds, eaten reindeer of questionable freshness, watched paintings come alive by lamplight, survived a storm with nothing but patience and a wolf pup for company, and learned that the phrase, "it's just a headache," had a very different treatment protocol 35,000 years ago. You've met Old Ember and her bone ornaments, Knuckle and his enormous hands, Bright Teeth and their reckless curiosity, Worm and his silent artistry, and Long Shadow, who reads the earth like a book and the sky like a map and tells stories that might be older than language itself. You've stood in the presence of mysteries, real mysteries, the kind that don't have solutions in the back of the book, and you're still standing, metaphorically, lying down. You know what I mean. The people you spent tonight with, the real ones, the ones who actually lived in those caves and built those temples and moved those stones and painted those animals and looked up at those stars, they deserve more than our wonder. They deserve our respect. Because they weren't primitive. They were us. The same brains, the same emotions, the same curiosity, the same stubborn refusal to accept the world as it is when it could be something more. They performed brain surgery with rocks and survived. They built monuments that have outlasted every civilization that came after. They tracked the sky with a precision we achieved again only in the last few centuries. They created art that still makes people cry in museums 40,000 years later. And they did all of it without writing a single word down, which means everything they knew, everything, was carried in human memory. spoken in human voices, and sustained by human trust. We should be in awe. We should be humbled. We should be deeply, genuinely grateful that they left us even the fragments that survive. And speaking of gratitude, let's talk about where you are right now. You're in a bed. An actual bed with a mattress that supports your back, and sheets that are clean, and a pillow that doesn't contain insects. The room you're in has walls that don't leak, a ceiling that doesn't drip, and a door that locks. The temperature is controlled. The air is filtered. There's running water nearby, hot and cold, available at any hour, for any purpose, without having to walk to a river. There's food in your kitchen that you didn't have to hunt, gather, or argue with anyone about sharing. You have antibiotics. You have dentistry. You have plumbing. You have, in your pocket or on your nightstand, a device that contains more information than every prehistoric mind that ever existed combined. You are living in a world that Old Ember would consider sorcery, and Knuckle would consider suspicious, and Bright Teeth would consider the most exciting thing that has ever happened. And here's what all of it teaches, if you let it. Not a lesson, not a moral. Just a quiet truth, offered gently, the way Old Ember might offer it without insistence, without urgency, just placed on the ground between you, like a gift you can pick up when you're ready. The truth is this: we have always been more than we think we are. Every era underestimates the era before it. Every generation assumes it's the first one to really figure things out. And every single time, the evidence says otherwise. The cave paintings say otherwise. The megaliths say otherwise. The skull with the healed trepanation hole says otherwise. We have always been curious, creative, brave, and slightly ridiculous, and the fact that we can't explain everything about our own past isn't a failure. It's proof that we've always been doing things for reasons that matter to us, even when they can't be measured, cataloged, or published in a peer-reviewed journal. So close your eyes now. The fan is still running, your own personal white noise, your own gentle wind, your own approximation of the draft that moves through the mouth of a limestone cave on a spring night 35,000 years ago. The room is dark, or close to it, and the day is over, and the mysteries are still there. They're always there, patient and enormous and quietly magnificent, but they don't need you tonight. They'll wait. They've been waiting for tens of thousands of years. They can wait until morning. Feel the weight of the blanket on your chest. Feel the pillow under your head. Feel the particular, irreplaceable, historically unprecedented luxury of being warm and safe and comfortable and alive. In a world that your ancestors navigated with nothing but their hands and their brains and their stubborn, beautiful, unexplainable need to make things and move stones and paint horses in the dark. You're the latest in a very long line. The longest line. The line that stretches back to the first fire, the first story, the first person who looked up at the sky and thought, I wonder. And you're here, at the end of a very long day, in a very comfortable bed, thinking the same thought, which means the line is unbroken, which means they succeeded, which means you can rest. Sleep well. The mysteries will be there tomorrow. But you've done enough, wondering for one night. Good night.